Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and today I'm here to continue our conversation about Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Now, if you have watched my previous lecture on the book, we had started talking about, we're still on the banking system of education, but he is going into the biophilic and necrophilic aspects of education itself. And then he continues that conversation into a little more details about the banking system of education. And in today's lecture, I will just cover page 78 and 79, where he kind of concludes his discussion of the banking system of education and its ramifications, and then moves on in the chapter to discussing what he calls the problem posing education. So just like all the other videos, I will read and then come back and we'll talk about it. There are only 2 readings in this video, and I think this isn't going to be a very long video. So here, let's go to reading from top of page 78. And then I'll come back and talk to you about it. When their efforts to act responsibly are frustrated, when they find themselves unable to use their faculties, people suffer. This suffering due to impotence is rooted in the very fact that the human equilibrium has been disturbed. But the inability to act which causes people's anguish also causes them to reject their impotence by attempting to restore their capacity to act. But can they? And how? One way is to submit to and identify with a person or group having power. By this symbolic participation in another person's life, men have the illusion of acting when in reality they only submit to and become a part of those who act. And this was a quote, I'll explain later from whom. Populist manifestations perhaps best exemplify this type of behavior by the oppressed, who, by identifying with charismatic leaders, come to feel that they themselves are active and effective. The rebellion they express as they emerge in the historical process is motivated by that desire to act effectively. The dominant elites consider the remedy to be more domination and repression, carried out in the name of freedom, order, and social peace, that is, the peace of the elites. Thus they can condemn logically from their point of view the violence of a strike by workers and can call upon the state in the same breath to use violence in putting down the strike. Now, this is a really instructive passage within the context of education, but also the life that we are living right now. What he's trying to explain here is, there is already an assumption that people naturally try to realize their full humanization. The quotes come from Erich Fromm, and that's where he's drawing his idea of this human nature, right? This tendency to seek full actualization, full realization. But there can be many false steps. This is one of the false steps that he's talking about, and that is populist politics, right? So in one way, if the banking model is still operative, but people are feeling stymied and they want to express themselves, the one instance always is their engagement in populist politics. And what happens in populist politics is that they place their desires in the words and actions of a populist leader, right? And even though people have an illusion of believing that they are expressing themselves, they actually just become tools within the designs of the populist leader or populist leadership, because they are the ones who are mobilizing these people to their own cause, but there is an illusion of freedom of expression on the part of the people. And that is really crucial for us to understand if you look at the populist movements in the world, United States, India, Brazil, so many other places in the world have now people siding with leaders who claim to solve all their problems, who think that they can somehow restore everything to the people. Right? That's the distinction between true revolution, which restores your full humanity and creates a just world, and populism, which mobilizes people's sentiment, right? And then uses it to maintain the status of the elite in itself, right? I mean, look at Mr. Trump's politics. With all the rhetoric of I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, has the economic inequality been reduced in the last 4 years? Right? Have the United States become more just? Has he even himself shown any attempt at sharing his wealth? No. But people who must express themselves, want to express themselves when they are stymied, that's where their energies can be directed. And then the whole hypocrisy of the system, right? When the elites are trying to safeguard their interest because they are saying, oh, these people in the street, they are violent, they are a threat to our society, they are a threat to peace, right? That's their argument. But look at what they want. They want the full force of the state against those people, right? They have no qualms about using violence, right? But they are representing people rising in the streets as a threat to the system, because that's literally what it is if they realize to fight for themselves and not in the name of a leader, right? The greatest example of it is right now happening in Portland, right? Okay, there are protesters in the street, they have been there, but the state institutions who are trying to control them are equally using the most brutal methods and the most unconstitutional methods, like incarcerating people without arresting them. There is no record. So the reaction then from the elite is equally as violent and intrusive, but it's couched in the language of law, right? And so what he's trying to illustrate by quoting from here is clearly this idea of rise of populism, and how, because people have not reflected on their condition, because they have not fully realized how to get to freedom, how populism can intrude on it and appropriate that, right? How reactionary forces can intrude on that and appropriate it. And that is one more danger of the banking system of education. So these are some of my thoughts about the passages I just read. Let's go read a little more, and then I'll come back and talk about it. Education as the exercise of domination stimulates the credulity of students with the ideological intent, often not perceived by educators, of indoctrinating them to adapt to the world of oppression. This accusation is not made in the naive hope that the dominant elites will thereby simply abandon the practice. Its objective is to call the attention of true humanists to the fact that they cannot use banking educational methods in the pursuit of liberation, for they would only negate that very pursuit. Nor may a revolutionary society inherit these methods from an oppressor society. The revolutionary society which practices banking education is either misguided or mistrusting of people. In either event, it is threatened by the specter of reaction. Unfortunately, those who espouse the cause of liberation are themselves surrounded and influenced by the climate which generates the banking concept, and often do not perceive its true significance or its dehumanizing power. Paradoxically, then, they utilize this same instrument of alienation in what they consider an effort to liberate. Indeed, some revolutionaries brand as innocents, dreamers, or even reactionaries those who would challenge this educational practice. But one does not liberate people by alienating them. Authentic liberation, the process of humanization, is not another deposit to be made in men. Liberation is a praxis, the action and reflection of men and women upon their world in order to transform it. Those truly committed to the cause of liberation can accept neither the mechanistic concept of consciousness as an empty vessel to be filled, nor the use of banking methods of domination, propaganda, slogans, deposits in the name of liberation. So if you read these passages critically, now he is moving into, after having discussed how the banking system works, how it can be alienating, how it can quell any attempt at knowing ourselves and attempting to claim our humanity, he is now going into the revolutionary movements themselves. Because the idea is even people involved in a fight against the oppressive order sometimes fail to realize that their own selves and their social practices are still overdetermined and underwritten by the same oppressive order against which they have fought. Remember, in my earlier lectures I had talked about that Freire, other than teaching us how to teach, is also a great text to learn as to how to cater against counter-revolution, but also how to make sure that the formerly oppressed themselves do not become oppressors, right? And this is one of the books that answers that question. But here he is talking about, this, first of all, he's saying is that to assume that simply by requesting it, that the dominant group will let go of its practices, I mean, that's naive, right? There has to be an active engagement in changing the system. Those who are invested in liberation then first must become cognizant of the idea that the modes of education that they are using are still garbed in the logic of the oppressive order itself, right? And he gives you the examples that sometimes the revolutionaries themselves practice the same methods, and when you object to it, they would call you, you're an idealist, right? Or these people don't know much, these people don't know their own interests. But his argument is that if you use the tools of dehumanization, no matter whether you've brought about a revolution, you cannot disalienate people and you cannot help them achieve their freedom, because the vocabulary, the mechanism is still connected to the old order in which a person is just a recipient of knowledge. So what do we learn as teachers and practitioners of change is not necessarily, we can't just bring a good book out and ask people to read it and that will change them. We have to question our own practices, right? Reflect on them, right? Because the change, liberation, is a praxis, right? That's the sentence. And we have already talked about it. What is praxis in Freire? Praxis in Freire is reflection with action, right? So what he famously says is, action without reflection is mere activism, right? So reflection on the living conditions, on why the world is the way it is, what's my place in it, and then action based on that knowledge to claim full humanity, right? That's the praxis. The action and reflection of man and woman upon their world to transform it. That's praxis. And that is not going to happen, and we are still on page 79, right? That is not going to happen if even after we have fought through, let's say even if we avoided the populist trap of falling for a leader, but if we continue practicing the mode of education or transmitting knowledge which was part of the old oppressive order, then we will perpetuate the same order and start seeing our own brothers and sisters with whom we might have fought in solidarity as, simpletons and those needing administration of knowledge from top down. And think of it, that happened, right? I mean, the greatest example of it is the Bolshevik Revolution, right? The August Revolution. What happened to Soviet Union, right? They brought in a Leninist revolution, and then they created an elite, and within that there were people who were just silenced, who were just doing the same stuff that they did otherwise with a slight difference, of things here and there, and it became an even more oppressive system. That is what he's trying to teach us about. Now, I'm going to end this lecture here, but we can learn from Freire and go elsewhere. I mean, this idea of reflecting upon where my thoughts are coming from, why am I putting my trust in someone else, can also teach us to question things like microfascisms, right? Which we go and read Deleuze for it, right? What is a microfascism? Every time you look at the world and there is something wrong with it, but you hope, I wish there were a leader who would come and rescue us from that. That is microfascism, because instead of thinking of yourself as an agent of change and looking for solidarity with others to change things, right? You are waiting for someone to come and rescue you. That's the mentality that he wants to dispel in people. Because what he wants to teach us is we all seek full humanization. We need to be agents through reflection and practical action, which is praxis, and we need to work in solidarity with each other. And dispensation of education within that system has to be co-education, where teacher and students come and learn from each other, where the teacher is not the passive recipient of top-down knowledge. So that's today's conversation about Freire. I'm going to stop here. Now please feel free to post your questions, your comments. They always make me think more, or any suggestions you have. And as always, I'm deeply grateful to all of you, because this means a lot to me. Being able to talk to you about things that matter to me through this medium is a great thing for me personally, professionally, but also emotionally. I feel connected. So thank you so much for your time, and I will be back next time from page 80 onwards, and we'll finish this chapter. Until then, stay safe, and as always, peace and love.